Israel ramps up its airstrikes and seals off Gaza as Hamas threatens the lives of hostages. And almost 190,000 people newly displaced by the bombardment in Gaza. The latest escalations on each side of the conflict. From rescue to recovery, the number of casualties expected to rise in earthquake-hit Afghanistan as the window for finding survivors begins to close. A mixed bag for the global economy as the IMF releases its latest report.
Live from Washington, this is The World Today.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Sally Ihan in Washington, D.C. Day 4 in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the death toll climbing on each side, as Israel says it's back in control over southern districts and the border with Gaza. Israel has expanded its military reserve call-up by hundreds of thousands in preparation for a full-scale offensive as both Hamas and Israel launch fresh attacks. Meanwhile, countries around the globe are learning that some of their citizens are among those kidnapped by Hamas. That includes a young woman of Israeli and Chinese heritage and several Italians, including a one-year-old baby. Associated Press News Director John Gambrell is in Jerusalem for the latest for us. John, the UN is calling for a humanitarian corridor in Gaza. What more can you tell us about that?
Sally, that's right. What we've seen from the UN as well as the International Committee of the Red Cross, which I spoke to today, is a coordinated demand for a humanitarian corridor to allow them to bring goods much needed by Gazans into that enclave. Now, what we've seen from the Israelis, yesterday we had the Israeli defense minister come out and say that they were going to besiege Gaza, stop the flow of water, food, fuel, and electricity into the Strip as they try to fight against Hamas following that unprecedented attack that we saw on Saturday. Now, what the International Committee of the Red Cross told me, their head of the Middle East, was that they need these supplies to get in to be able to treat the wounded. He said from war injuries like blasts and also ammunition fire. In order to treat them, they need that medicine. They need those bandages and other equipment. And that right now the Red Cross is saying that they are starting to run out of supplies, as are other groups. Now, whether or not this humanitarian corridor is going to open, that's another question. The Red Cross also is saying that they're discussing with the Israelis as well as Hamas to try to gain access to those taken capture already. That includes any Hamas militant that Israel may have arrested as part of their operations in southern Israel, and those over 100 Israeli hostages and who are now held in the Gaza Strip by Hamas. The Red Cross says that they've not had any luck in trying to get on either way to get to those captives, and they say they're still pushing. Meanwhile, we're seeing a continuation of these just punishing Israeli airstrikes, and something different this time around. We're seeing the Israelis, instead of kind of pinpoint targeting buildings, they're just reducing entire city blocks to rubble in Gaza. That leads analysts to suggest that this ground offensive is coming. They've already called up some 360,000 troops, brought armored personnel carriers and tanks to the borders. So it seems like we're in for a longer war, Sally.
And John, we understand the death toll in Israel is still rising after Saturday's attack.
Yes, Sally, that's correct. Today, Israel announced that over 1,000 people had been killed. And one of my Associated Press colleagues traveled to southern Israel, accompanying troops there to a small kibbutz that's very close to Gaza. He saw black smoke off in the distance, and the homes were just destroyed. The bodies of the young, the old were there. He watched his soldiers start to take those bodies away. There were also the bodies of Hamas militants that were still on the ground there, cars destroyed, homes just reduced to rubble. The Israeli soldiers that he spoke to said that they wanted to fight to continue on, and it just goes to show that this conflict is far from over. Sally.
Certainly is. All right, John, thank you for the update. John Gambrell for us in Jerusalem there. The UN Human Rights Chief has condemned Israel's blockade of Gaza, saying it's illegal under international law. He also condemned the, quote, horrifying mass killings by members of Palestinian armed groups. And he said taking hostages is also forbidden under international law. Akram al-Satri has more on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Gaza Strip has a very, very high rate of unemployment. You have around 54% of the people living in Gaza living under poverty line. You have 71% of the youth living also under poverty line, living unemployed. The situation in Gaza has been dire like for such a very long time. But now with this full block imposed on the water and the fuel and also the food supplies, the situation is likely to aggravate more. The situation is likely to worsen. But the issue and the paradox in Gaza is that food became no longer a priority for people who are now concerned about their very own survival. Now, over the time, by the minute you can hear explosions, and by the minute you see victims taken from under the rubble of their homes to the hospitals, you see people who are dying. So with the little food, water and supplies they have, with this crisis of the electricity, there is much bigger challenge for the Palestinians, which is the challenge of staying alive under the comprehensive, under the very broad and harsh bombardment that is affecting their life and sometimes and most of the times taking their life. There are some families that were targeted in Khan Yunis area, in Rafah area, in the north that are still under the rubble of their houses, and the civil defense and some other medical services are struggling for the sake of retrieving them from under the rubble. Some of them are died and some of them are struggling to live. So the situation is extremely catastrophic, and the number of victims is increasing by the second, not by the minute. Well, I was at the Shifa hospital a while ago, and I saw the influx of a large number of people. Some of them are dead, as I said, and some of them are still alive. Minister of Health said they are running short of all types of supplies, and they are afraid and concerned they might not be able to accommodate the large number of people who are injured who are coming to a Shifa hospital or in all the other hospitals in Gaza Strip. I saw a triage. In that triage, they are trying to triage different cases, the mild ones, the medium ones, and the severe ones. According to that severity of the injury, they're referring some of them home after offering them some mild treatment, and they ask them to go home. So they are prioritizing, and they're hoping that they would continue prioritizing as long as they can to save as much lives as they can, but they are struggling under the ever-increasing burden and pressure resulting from the ongoing bombardment for the 3 past days.
Iran denies that it was behind the surprise attack by Hamas. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called the accusations, quote, nonsense. It was his first public comments since the war broke out over the weekend. Khamenei did, however, applaud Hamas for the assault, calling it, quote, epic. Iran is a long-time backer of Hamas, which has governed Gaza since 2007. Washington's top diplomat is headed to Israel. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel as a message of solidarity. He's expected to arrive on Thursday. At least 14 Americans have been killed in the violence. President Biden just spoke at the White House, vowing full support for Israel. Jim Spellman reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden was briefed Tuesday morning by his national security team about the situation in Israel. The president then spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. President Biden reiterated his support for Israel.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
The White House has also been communicating with European allies to coordinate the response to the crisis. The U.S. has committed an aircraft carrier group to the eastern Mediterranean and is increasing fighter jet squadrons in the region, but the White House says there are no plans for U.S. ground troops to participate in the fighting. Militant groups in Gaza are believed to be holding more than 100 people prisoner, including Americans. Families of some of those U.S. citizens being held are calling for their safe return.
The Israeli government has to bring back all the hostages that are kept in hostage by the Hamas terrorists. I want also to speak about the responsibility that the U.S. administration, President Biden, and the Secretary of State Blinken has for the lives of every U.S. citizen that is out there.
President Biden says U.S. experts will consult with Israeli officials on a strategy to to bring those prisoners home safely. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
The international response to the fighting has been for countries, first and foremost, to safeguard their own citizens. Latin America, in particular, has been quick to respond, as Alistair Baverstock reports from Mexico City.
As the conflict in the Middle East intensifies and most commercial flights to and from Israel are cancelled, countries around Latin America are responding rapidly. Mexico has sent 2 military planes to evacuate around 300 Mexican nationals from the country who have requested their removal from the Middle East over fears of being caught up in the conflict. 2 Mexican nationals, 1 man and 1 woman, are believed to be among hostages taken by Hamas in Gaza over the weekend, according to Mexico's foreign minister. Elsewhere in Latin America, Chile, which recognizes the state of Palestine and recently announced plans to open an embassy in Gaza, has also sent a military plane to evacuate its citizens from the region. Brazil has plans for sending 6 rescue planes to accommodate the more than 1,700 Brazilians who the government says have asked to be evacuated. Latinos from all across the region have found themselves stranded in the Middle East following the breakout of this conflict last Saturday, with governments from Colombia, Argentina, Peru and Paraguay all reporting requests from their citizens for evacuation. Argentina in particular has been affected and also has an Air Force rescue plan underway. 7 Argentine nationals were confirmed killed in the Hamas bombardment on Saturday, and several others still missing. The country is home to the largest Jewish population in the region and has seen hundreds take to the streets of Buenos Aires in marches in support of Israel. Argentina's foreign ministry condemned the attacks launched from Gaza and expressed solidarity with the Israeli people. As the conflict in Gaza continues, countries in Latin America will be focused on making their citizens safe before anything else. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
EU foreign ministers have wrapped up an emergency meeting on the situation in Israel and Gaza. They clarified that the EU would continue sending humanitarian aid to Palestinians while still standing firmly alongside Israel. Alex Carrier has the latest from Brussels.
It's been a messy couple of days for the European Union and its position on the situation in Israel and Gaza. Shortly after the violence erupted, heads of state from across the bloc rushed to condemn Hamas's terrorist attack and expressed their strong solidarity with Israel. Among them was European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who said Israel had a right to defend itself against what she called heinous attacks. But it's the EU's financial support of Palestine which ended up in the spotlight. Oliver Varhelyi, the EU's neighbourhood commissioner, said all the development funding to Palestine would be suspended pending review. The problem is he announced this without consulting any of his colleagues, his boss, or any of the EU's member states, prompting a sharp U-turn from the EU and clarification from its top diplomat.
The overwhelming majority was against the idea or the proposal of suspending the payments to the Palestinian Authority. This is the thing that matters. If they consider that it has to be done a review, we'll do a review. But this doesn't mean that the support to the Palestinian Authority is being suspended or the payments cancelled.
Having finally clarified its own position, the EU will now turn its attention to 2 other priorities: making sure violence doesn't spread in the Middle East and making sure the world doesn't forget about Russia's attack on Ukraine right on its doorstep. Alex Carrier, CGTN, Brussels.
Still ahead, Russia suffers a defeat at the United Nations and complicated rescue efforts in earthquake-hit Afghanistan, hampered by crumbling infrastructure. Details next. Welcome back. Search and rescue efforts in Western Afghanistan are being scaled back as hope fades of finding more earthquake survivors. Nearly 3,000 people are known dead. Samaralai Abbasin reports from Ground Zero.
We departed from Kabul on an AN-32 military aircraft. 2 hours later, we arrived at the epicenter of the quake that shook Afghanistan.
We just arrived to Herat airport, and from this on we will be heading to Zindajan district, where it's the most affected area in the world of the recent earthquake.
Authorities say search and rescue operations remain underway.
Vehicles are being loaded with both the dead and wounded in uncountable numbers. The members of the Mujahideen are delivering the victims to Herat city whenever they find them. Meanwhile, other rescue teams and locals have also been transferring the victims, but the numbers are not yet clear.
Siahab is one of dozens of villages that were completely destroyed. Death toll often rises as information trickles in from remote areas.
I was in the city center. When I got back, I saw everything was ruined. 7 of my nephews, 2 sons and my sister, as well as 5 of her children, lost their lives.
It's not clear how many people are now buried under these debris. But one thing is clear, the rescue operations are carried on with limited resources. I just saw a couple of excavators, which are not enough. And the locals are trying by traditional ways, and it's impossible to find out who are under the debris.
Rescue efforts have been severely hampered by the crumbling infrastructure.
The rescue operation is on the verge of completion. All the rescue teams were struggling collectively, and all the available humanitarian resources and equipment were deployed to the area.
The dead are piled up in these containers, while their loved ones desperately try to identify them.
My daughter-in-law has been admitted to hospital. I lost my 2 young sons, ages 20 and 13 years old.
I lost 4 family members. I also lost my father and my mother.
In this area, there are dozens of injured now under treatment, and the numbers are increasing because in many areas the rescue and search operation still continue. Samaralai Abbasin, CGTN, Herat Province.
More than 24 people were killed in Myanmar in an overnight artillery strike. It occurred at a camp for the internally displaced near the border with China. The attack was one of the deadliest on civilians since the military seized power in 2021. Rebels who control this region blame the military, but Myanmar's military leaders deny responsibility. The UN says more than 1 million people have been displaced by the conflict in Myanmar. Russia fails to regain a seat on the United Nations top human rights body. The General Assembly voted to deny Russia's bid to return to the Human Rights Council. Instead, the 2 seats allocated for Eastern Europe went to Bulgaria and Albania. Moscow was ousted from the council 18 months ago over the conflict in Ukraine. China will also serve on the council when the next 3-year term starts in 2024. Tensions are rising in Guatemala. The country has seen nearly 2 weeks of protests following recent elections. Police have used tear gas after a few peaceful protests turned violent. Demonstrators want the Attorney General to resign. They accuse her of trying to prevent the president-elect from taking office. And late Monday, the outgoing president addressed the nation. The president also called on the president-elect to meet with mediators to ensure a peaceful handover in January. Coming up, recognising a decade's worth of achievements, China highlights the successes of its Belt and Road Initiative.
No war, no one again began holding guns. Words protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
We are CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Welcome back. An IMF report from its annual meeting in Marrakesh has put global growth prospects in the spotlight. Uche Okonkwo takes a look at how escalating conflicts could shake an already troubling economic forecast.
The sprint back to pre-pandemic growth levels still remains elusive as the global economy continues to limp along. That was a grim message from the IMF as it released its World Economic Outlook report at its annual meetings in Marrakesh. Its forecast for global growth remains well below the historical average of 3.8%, slowing to 3% this year from 3.5% in 2022, and falling even further to 2.9% in 2024.
Important divergences are appearing. The slowdown is more pronounced in advanced economies than in emerging markets and developing economies. Among advanced economies, the US has been revised up with resilient consumption and investment, while the euro area has been revised down as tighter monetary policy and the energy crisis took a toll. There is divergence also among emerging markets and developing economies, with China facing growing headwinds, while Brazil, India, and Russia are revised up.
Throwing even more uncertainty into the mix is the escalation of violence in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Already, the Russia-Ukraine conflict caused major commodity markets to fragment. Even more geopolitical tensions could make matters worse. And yet another risk could see developing nations hit even harder, causing inflation to rise and triggering knock-on effects to monetary policy.
I think we have to be cautious. I think it's too early to really assess what the impact might be. And as you pointed out, of course, this happened after our round of current projections was closed. But we would have to wait a little bit before seeing what the impact might be. Of course, we all hope for a rapid de-escalation of the conflict and an end to the violence.
Inflation still remains the itch that no one will be able to scratch, at least not in the medium term. While headline inflation has come down from multi-decade highs in 2022, the fund says measures to stem its rise are proving sticky.
All in all, most countries are not expected to return to inflation target until 2025. Taken together, our projections are increasingly consistent with a soft landing scenario, bringing inflation down without a major downturn in activity.
Well, all eyes now turn to monetary policy. The recent move by central banks to tighten rates in an effort to reduce inflation is expected to cool economic activity going forward. But the IMF says, with risks to the outlook tilted to the downside, there's little margin for policy error.
Central banks have more work to do to bring inflation back to target for a sustained period. They must avoid a premature easing.
While the IMF does say that risks to the outlook are more balanced than earlier this year, fiscal consolidation will be key in tackling soaring debt, while structural reforms will be crucial to reviving medium-term growth prospects.
Fiscal buffers have eroded in many countries, with elevated debt levels, rising funding costs, slowing growth, and an increasing mismatch between the growing demands on the state and available fiscal resources.
Also, a stronger focus on accelerating the green transition, increasing resilience to climate shocks, and improving food security will be key. Uche Okonkwo, CGTN, Marrakesh, Morocco.
China President Xi Jinping's Hallmark Belt and Road Initiative has celebrated its 10th anniversary, and Beijing has marked the occasion with the release of a key policy document. Liu Jiaxin has details.
What's been achieved under the Belt and Road Initiative that China proposed 10 years ago cannot simply be summed up in a 61-page book. But the words in it give the international community a better understanding of the BRI's value.
The joint construction of the Belt and Road is rooted in history, responds to reality, and looks to the future. It is not a solo of China, but a chorus of all partner countries. It has become a major practical platform for building a community with a shared future for mankind.
The white paper presents all-round results achieved under the BRI in policy, infrastructure, trade, finance integration, and people-to-people exchanges. Prioritizing infrastructure connectivity, a number of landmark projects such as the China-Laos Railway, the Jakarta-Bandung High-Speed Railway in Indonesia, the Hungary-Serbia Railway, and the Port of Piraeus in Greece have been completed and put into operation. The China-Europe freight train has opened up an Asia-Europe land transportation channel, and the Silk Road Maritime International Road Network has spread across the globe.
From 2013 to 2022, the cumulative scale of our trade in goods with partner countries reached over $19 trillion, achieving an average annual growth rate of 6.4%. This growth rate is both higher than the overall growth rate of China's foreign trade during the same period and higher than the global trade during the same period.
In the 10 years that have passed since its launch, remarkable and profound changes have been recorded in the 61-page white paper. Of course, 10 years is a long range of time, but if we look at it under the picture of building a global community of shared future, then it only sits at the very beginning of this long and sustainable journey. Liu Jiaxin, CGTN, Beijing.
Countries around the globe are marking World Mental Health Day. China opted to turn the spotlight on child and adolescent wellness. Beijing has created special funds to bolster the prevention and treatment of common illnesses like anxiety and depression for the nation's youth. Increased funding is also going toward mental health pilot programs and improving access to public psychological services in many schools and communities. That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Sally Ihan, and of course, for any more news anytime, check out our website, cgtn.com.